We are discussing today the AV RFP. We're discussing how to build a better AV partnership for impactful events. Joining us today and sharing practical strategies and advice is Bill Mott, Vice President of Production Sales at Pinnacle Live. Prior to joining Pinnacle Live, Bill founded and led Falcon Events as CEO. Bill brings a unique blend of technical expertise, business insight, and creative vision to every project, and luckily to us today. So I'll hand it over to you if you'll give us give a warm welcome. Welcome, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Glad to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I know we're really busy. I don't think this is going to go the full 60 minutes. I'm going to try to get us in and out of here pretty quick and give you some tips. So I've worked in the AV industry a long time. I've worked at one of the largest third-party AV production companies, more of a mobile production company, off and on for 10 years. Not going to name any names today and give free publicity to the big guys. But I've worked at one of the largest in-house AV companies in North America, one of the largest off-site or third-party AV companies in North America. As Amanda said, I started and founded more of a boutique agency, small business event production company. Ran that for 5 years, which was acquired last year by Pinnacle Live. And so now I lead sales for Pinnacle. And I'm here today to save you some money. I know that sounds crazy. I know you're probably going to say, now, Bill, I've been in this business a little while too. Why would you, the AV sales guy, want to save me some money? Well, great question. It really comes down to, it doesn't matter how great we produce your event, how flawlessly we execute the AV for your event. If you walk away feeling like you overpaid or you didn't get a good deal, that's going to tarnish any good efforts we made on the production side. It's going to tarnish the whole customer experience and your journey in using the AV company. So it's in our interest to help you maximize your AV spend, get the most bang for your buck. All right. So let's get into it. Before we really get into the tips and tricks, we really need to understand the AV landscape and kind of the differences in business models. There are a lot of different types of AV companies out here. There are in-house AV companies. These are companies that have an office at the venue, at the hotel, or at the conference center. They have an office. They have the gear there. They staff full-time employees in that building. And they have a very specific business model. There's commission structures involved that you should be aware of. And it's a complex business model, all right? Opposite of that, you have third-party AV companies. And these types vary wildly, all right? So you have big national providers that have a fleet of trucks and tons of gear and tons of employees, and they're just really good at logistics and moving their people and gear around the country. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have small companies, small mom and pops, boutiques, agencies. Sometimes these companies have half a dozen people and that's it. And they manage the event. They manage the AV for the event, but they outsource a lot of the labor, event-based labor and equipment. I know this is probably common knowledge, but it's just good to really frame this so you understand that these types of companies have different business models. They have different uses and gratifications. They have different motivations. They have different discounting and pricing strategies. So understanding kind of where they're coming from is going to help you in the negotiation. Regardless of what type of event company you're dealing with, they make money really 3 different ways. They're renting you equipment, they're renting you production labor on site, and then they're selling services. And services are pretty varied. You can have creative and design services. Sometimes those services are used before the event. If you're using like kind of helping build out the theme of the show or the beautification of the show or on-screen graphics, you've got rigging and power and internet and all kinds of other services that an AV company could provide. So I say all these for you to frame these in your minds as levers that you could potentially pull So if you're not getting the best deal on equipment rental, if the AV company's not budging on equipment, maybe they would budge on labor and services. Maybe there's some other levers you could pull to get your overall price down. All right. There's different pricing structures too, especially with labor. Traditionally, for in-house AV companies, you're going to see day rates. I said on labor, I meant you're going to see day rates on equipment. And if you think about it, why that is a lot of in-house AV companies, they are doing a lot of weddings. They're doing a lot of one-day board meetings. So they price out all of their equipment basically on a day rate. However, if conversely, that is not really what you're going to see with third party. You're going to see more week rate or show rates. So if you're comparing apples to apples, if you've got a third party AV quote and you've got an in-house AV quote, you're probably going to see differences in day rates versus show rates. So be very conscious of that. And it's totally within your rights. If you've got a great looking quote from a third party AV company, for you to go to your in-house and say, hey, I'd really like to see show rates for this equipment so I can have apples to apples. Can you do that? You have every right to ask for that sort of adjustment. So something to keep in mind there. And of course, as mentioned, you got labor variations across all these different AV company types. So in-house, you're probably never going to have to pay for travel. So that's a big plus. You might pay a little bit more on day rates for the labor, but if you use a third party, you may pay less for the day rate of the labor, but you may have travel costs to factor in on getting those key leads flown into that country or flown into that city or traveled into that city. So something to keep in mind there. Also, one thing to keep in mind if you're using in-house, they are to have the privilege of being the in-house AV company. The standard commission structure across the industry, and this is pretty consistent across any in-house AV company you work with. They're typically giving a 45 to 55% commission back to the hotel for the privilege of having an office in that property. Yes, if you don't know that, it can be pretty eye-opening, but that means roughly 50 cents of every dollar you pay to that AV company is going back to the hotel. Now, why would an AV company agree to this, right? That is a crazy business model. You're basically paying for leads, right? You're in-house at that property and you have all these groups coming in every day, day in and day out, week in and week out. You're getting a lot of opportunities to bid on business that's coming through that building. And that to have that advantage, to be able to get all those leads and have all those opportunities to bid, they pay for those in the form of a commission. So something to keep in mind if you're really trying to, beat down the in-house to get better rates, there is this commission structure in play that's kind of it's a roadblock, right? In a lot of senses, but there's other things you can do, which we'll get into them in a minute. So cost drivers in AV for meeting planners. So equipment quality and scale of production. I see a lot of RFPs that want to know how much gear do you own versus how much do you rent? Are you going to show up to my show with a lot of rented equipment, or do you own this equipment? And that's a fair question. However, I do question how relevant it is in the modern AV production world. I would say that the largest AV company, the AV company that owns the most equipment in the United States, again, not going to name names, they are very likely the biggest cross-renter of equipment too. When they run out of gear, they have busy seasons. Also, consider this. You may say, hey, how much equipment do you own? And you've got a mom and pop AV company that says, oh, we own 100% of our equipment. What they're not telling you, though, is that they bought it maybe in 1997 and it's all going on 30 years old. So is that a plus or is that a con that they own all their equipment if it's all old equipment, right? So something to consider when you're asking that question in your RFP, how much equipment do you own? Might not be relevant, all right? Labor, again, varies wildly across, union versus non-union, local versus travel. These are definitely cost drivers. If you're doing a show in a union property, you definitely need to pad that budget if it's in a union property, because those rates are set by the local union and there's really no negotiating there. All right. Load in, load out schedules. You got to plan for that. And that's going to be labor. And typically you're not going to pay for equipment on a load in day or a load out day, but you might pay for labor. You're very likely going to pay for labor. So keep that in mind and budget accordingly. Rigging, power, and internet fees. This can be a moving target, whether you go with the in-house or a third party, which we'll get into in just a second. And then you got venue specific costs. So these have been increasing over the years, but you've got exclusivity charges, you've got breakout room exclusivity, you've got surcharges, you've got service fees. What I would say is read your contracts carefully. Anything you don't like, ask if you can remove it. You're well within your rights to negotiate, and it's on you to negotiate. All right. Let's talk about some AV myths and realities. I've heard it both ways. In-house is always cheaper. In-house is always more expensive. You can't really paint a broad stroke here. It really is a case-by-case basis. I've seen some smoking deals from the in-house AV company, and I've seen some price gouging, right? It's all over the place. So you can't just walk in with a preconceived notion of how it's going to go. I would suggest walk into any negotiation table with an open mind and in good faith that the other party's going to as well, because 9 times out of 10 they are. All right. AV is just plugging in a microphone. The oversimplification of what AV is, that can definitely bite you. Sometimes you can ask a very simple request, but it's not that simple. There's a lot of ramifications. One example I can think of off the top of my head here is power strips to all the attendee classroom tables. It sounds like a simple request, but the power draw and the liability and the work and the tape and the labor to run all those cables across the room, it can take sometimes half a day of 2 people just doing nothing but that. The amount of power that has to be in place to support all those power strips, you can't just plug it into a wall. It has to be a special power. So, little things sometimes can have cascading effects that are very complicated. So just keep that in mind. Are there AV companies gouging? Absolutely. Are there AV companies getting squeezed by razor thin margins and going out of business every day? Absolutely. Both can be true. So again, I would suggest going into every negotiation in good faith with an open mind and be prepared to negotiate. So this is a typical variance between in-house and third-party AV costs. Okay, in-house is in gold, third-party is in purple. So this is if you were to do the same job using an in-house AV company versus a third party at the same property. Okay, typically you're going to pay more in gear with the in-house. You might pay typically slightly more in labor. However, if you go with the in-house, your power, internet, and rigging costs are usually going to be lower. So you can't really just look at one of these verticals and say, oh, the equipment costs were outrageous. Compare that with what your power and internet rigging costs would be if you would have gone with the third party. And let me explain why this is. If you go with the in-house, they're going to be more apt to negotiate with you and give you better rates for power, internet, and rigging. If you go with the third party, you may save money on the gear and the labor, but you're going to end up paying more for internet, rigging, and power. It's just the way it is. And if anyone's real quick with the math or they got their calculator going, can we add up all of these and where do we land for the total cost of the show? I'm not going to make you do that. They're both about 80 grand, right? So in the end, it's all washing out. Don't look at individual buckets of product, labor, gear, services. Look at the totality of it all. And I think largely you're going to find that it's pretty negligible whether you go with in-house or third party. So then the question you have to ask yourself is, who do I want to work with? Who's going to be the better partner for me and my organization? All right. Why does building a better RFP matter? Well, right off the bat, it sets the tone. If you spend some good time putting a lot of key details in the RFP, if you come to the table in a very professional manner, you're going to attract more professional and detail-oriented production companies. If you throw together something, if you just send over a spreadsheet with very little details, you're going to get probably an in-kind proposal that's not very accurate and might not have had a lot of time spent on it. So, set the tone right, create the RFP right, and we'll get into kind of what to include and what not to include in a few slides here. Of course, you want to avoid misquotes and unexpected costs with the right RFP. That's the whole point here, right? What to include in an effective RFP? You want to include your event overview and goals. How many attendees are you going to have? Why are you doing this? What is the message that's going out? What kind of change in the world are you trying to enact? That helps. It may seem trivial to put it in an RFP, but it definitely helps with the design and how we think about where the equipment is going to go, how the equipment's going to flow. We'd love to see detailed agendas with room assignments as much as you can. I know sometimes RFPs are written many months out, but if you just know a general room quantity and a general agenda, its show starts on Monday, it ends on Thursday. We're going to have 12 rooms. Don't know where the rooms are going to be yet, but we're going to have 12 breakout rooms. Labor and equipment is largely priced out based on footprint, how many rooms. So having those key metrics is going to allow us to really create a more accurate proposal. All right. Equipment needs, even if, I love to see previous quotes or SOWs from your previous events. You can black out the pricing, but knowing the counts and the quantities and how it was structured, super helpful, especially if you thought the show went well in previous years and you'd like to mimic it. All right. If you have floor plans, great. We'll take it, include it. Labor expectations, setup times, tech support. Do you have any evening symposiums where the crew's going to be late? Do you have any early mornings? Do you want to do a Q-to-Q rehearsal the day before, or do you just want to do kind of a tech check slide run through the morning of? All that needs to be known in the RFP because that's going to affect our labor calls and our labor schedules. All right. We talked about load in and load out. Internet and power needs. Do you have heavy internet needs or heavy power needs? Are you doing an LED wall, wanting an LED wall that needs a lot of power? Any sort of budget guidance. And on that topic, declare your budget. I know that's a controversial thing to say. But we love to see it because I don't know if your budget's $5, $500, $500,000. I don't know, right? I kind of know if you kind of, I can take a guess, but it might not be accurate. So I know this is a hot topic. So Amanda, I'd love to do a poll right now. Can we roll that poll on who declares their budget and their RFPs currently?
Absolutely, yeah. We've already got quite a few answers rolling in, so we'll give folks just another minute. But
okay,
I have a question for you while we're doing that. Oh, never mind. You got a fun picture.
Oh yeah. So just to provide some comedic relief while we're waiting on the polls, I always loved this meme here. This is what it feels like. I mean, am I right here? What's your budget? What's your price? Who's going to draw first? It's a showdown at the OK Corral is what it seems like. And do we really want to collaborate like this, or do we just want to put the cards on the table? Right. I tend to think the latter. I'd love to see more budget numbers in the RFPs, but I can see it both sides. I buy products and services too. You want to keep your cards close. So how's the poll looking?
I can tell you, Bill, we're pretty high leaning on no so
Yeah.
far. We're about 65-70% no, and then
Yeah.
tied with yes and sometimes at about 15 to 20%.
Okay. Well, I did want to just draw attention to this topic and maybe convince one or two of you to consider trying putting your budget number in on your next RFP and seeing if your experience is better or worse. Just do it as a test. All right. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
All right. What not to include in an RFP? Overly vague descriptions such as standard AV setup. I honestly don't know what a standard AV setup is. It's different for every client, especially when you're talking about breakout rooms. Sometimes you want 2 mics, sometimes you want 4 mics, sometimes you want 2 screens, sometimes you want 1. So please be specific with what you need. Last minute requests, sometimes those can have high impact, costly impact. So consider those strategically. Incomplete agendas, we know, whatever you have, right? Even if it's a placeholder just for budgetary reasons, love to see an agenda. Again, rehearsal time is definitely a cost driver. So if you forget to include rehearsal time or rehearsal needs, that can definitely add some unforeseen cost. And then really a sole focus of cost over experience or reliability, right? Do you always want the cheapest product on the shelf? I would argue a lot of times in life you don't. Sometimes you do, but a lot of times in life you do not want the cheapest product. So be careful. If you're just buying on cost, you may be disappointed in the end, as with anything in life. All right, preventing scope creep and budget overruns. Partnering with the right AV company. You really want to look for a company that genuinely cares and has interest in your program and in your mission. If it's going in one ear and out the other on what you're trying to accomplish and what your organization is trying to accomplish, take note of that. If you're, curing a rare disease and the AV company is really, positively affected by your work, maybe that's a better partner to engage with there, right? How creative are they? Are you bringing problems and solutions if you're bringing problems and pain points from years past and this new AV company's coming to the table with innovative and creative solutions to solve it, definitely take note of that. Does experience matter, right? That's the ultimate question. I would argue in some very complex events, absolutely experience matters. However, if it's not that complex, maybe a new up and coming, smaller firm might be hungrier, might be more responsive, might be ready to bend over backwards for you. So I would also jump down to, the last bullet, point on that experience topic and say, a lot of the big shops and the big firms, I definitely have seen complacency set in over the years, right? They get all the leads, they get all the opportunities, they get all the shows, and over time, does the service hold up? Do they get complacent? Do they get lazy? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But something to keep in mind, if you're just going with the biggest gorilla on the block, you may not get the service that a smaller firm might give you. You want to look for responsiveness. How fast are they responding to your emails and your text messages? How flexible are they, right? So all things to consider when you're talking with a new AV company and going through the RFP process. All right, this is a big one for me, the importance of line item details. This is my pet peeve. I see a lot of AV quotes come across my desk from competitors or from partner channel AV companies, and you see 3 or 4 pages of equipment, and you see one price at the bottom, and it's a nice round number. It's like $100,000, and you don't see any pricing for the actual line items and how it got to $100,000, right? And so if that was me, if I was the buyer, I would say, well, if we're just throwing out big round numbers here. How about we take $25,000 off? That's exactly what I would say. And I would encourage you to say that too. If you get a quote with no line item pricing, it's a red flag, and it causes a lot of problems down the road. Because if you want to change from 4 mics to 6 mics, or if you want to add a breakout room, how is that going to be affected, right? You have no idea. You have no idea. It's lazy. It's non-transparent, and frankly, it needs to stop. I'll get off my soapbox now, but keep that in mind, and let's all work together to kind of move that needle, because that needs to change. All right. Preemptive planning with the AV team. This is really important to keep unforeseen costs and unforeseen scope creep. You want to lock in the scope early, with a detailed quote. Insist on a tech walkthrough. Ask the AV team to explain the labor plan. Do you have an evening reception? Ask the AV company, are you going to use the same crew? Are you bringing in a new crew? Am I going to go into overtime? What is the plan, right? You have every right to ask these questions, and it is on you to ask these questions. Clarify on that topic, clarify the labor rules, overtime policies, especially if you've got early mornings and late nights. You need to be well aware what that plan is. Get visuals, require the AV company to make floor plans and CADs. That lets you know that they are on it. They know where the gear is going. They have a plan, and there's not going to be a lot of unforeseen anything, right? The plan is in place. Managing your leaders and customers. I say customers because sometimes, you're working for an organization and your boss is the customer. Sometimes you're an independent meeting planner and your customer is the customer. So either way, when your leader or customer comes to you, educate them that every change has a cost. Give them the language. We can absolutely do that, but let me check the cost impact first. Be careful with small asks. We talked about that before. And then I would suggest always, it doesn't have to be in black and white, but in the back of your mind or in your back pocket, add a 10% contingency for AV. You just never know what the union's going to hit you with at the end of the show, what freight or, any unforeseen costs can creep up. This is a very complex service with a lot of moving parts. So adding a 10% contingency is a smart financial move when you're spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on AV. All right. Venue and labor traps to watch out for. Rigging points and power fees. Read the fine print in those contracts. How much is per point? How many points are in the room? I'm on a show right now. I'm in a hotel room. I'm hoping the internet is stable. I think it is. I'm at the JW Marriott Hill Country right now in beautiful San Antonio. And this particular show I'm at, it wasn't at this property. I'm not going to say what property it was last year, but they overcharged for rigging points. They said that they charged us for X amount of rigging points and when we went back and counted, it was less. So they probably an honest mistake, but really, you need to ask these questions. How many motors and, all of that, and verify, trust, but verify. Union labor minimums, especially in union properties. Are pre-production or project management hours accounted for? So this is a big one. A lot of in-house AV companies will not charge you for pre-production or project management hours. I would argue that you want some of those hours in your budget, because here's the deal, especially if you have a very complex event, let's say it's a multi-day conference, that AV company is going to be your partner. They're going to be on your team in the weeks and months leading up to the show. You need them to pick up the phone and respond to your emails and get on pre-planning calls week in and week out leading into that show. And if they don't put any pre-production or project management hours on your quote, how likely are they going to be? How responsive are they going to be, right? If they're not getting paid, right? So I would suggest, hey, why don't you telling the AV company, why don't you throw like 8 hours of pre-planning in your quote, just so we can have pre-planning calls and your time is accounted for. And so there's no gray area there, right? You want them to be somewhere to plan with you and be your partner. You're paying them to be there. They will be there. They'll be there and they should be there with bells on, right? If there is no pre-production, you could expect a kind of a crickets kind of situation, right? Which you don't want. So again, I would argue you want some pre-production hours on any sort of complex AV event. In-house AV versus external vendor dynamics is something I'm just going to touch on briefly, but it is a very political jousting kind of game between in-house. If you bring in a third party and working with the in-house AV company, a great, only what anybody wants in this industry is a piece of the pie, and it doesn't have to be a huge piece of the pie, but it does help your in-house AV teams. Even if you're using a third party and you're bringing in a third party for most of the services, if you were to throw some work towards the in-house, it goes a long way. It goes a long way in their service to you. And they're working, how well they work with your third-party AV company. So it can just be a breakout, or it can be an evening session, or it can be some sort of thing out on the lawn, or any small event. If you want to kind of carve up the service and keep some of the resources going toward the in-house, it goes a long way. It can go a long way for morale and just the overall show success, I would say. So something to keep in mind there. And then also, if you know that your third-party AV company is bringing in a lot of rented equipment, suggest to them, hey, why don't you see if you can rent some of that equipment from the in-house. Apparently they have a lot of equipment in their storeroom. Try to rent it from the in-house. That's an easy suggestion that just keeps everybody happy. So something to keep in mind. All right. Key takeaways. I told you we'd get through this quick. You don't need to know how to run a switcher. You're an event organizer, but you do need to manage the process. So you really got to step up and take ownership of a lot of this. I know it's boring. I know it's a lot of contract reading, but it is your show. It is your process. So definitely step up and own it. On-site decisions go through you. Don't let a lot of changes just start cascading and snowballing without your knowledge. You need to, put the hammer down. All decisions go through you, because you're the one that's going to be paying for the cost ramifications, right? So really take ownership. Implement a change order process if you need to, if there's a lot of moving parts. Review the scope and quote with the AV team on site. This is a big one, and this is one I really like. If the sales to operations handoff on the AV in the AV industry is never perfect. It's riddled with human error and communication errors. So it's a really good best practice to take the quote that you were given by the AV salesperson, and when you get on site and you have an AV project manager or production manager that you're working close with, review the quote with that individual. The salesperson made it for you. They're not in the room anymore. Now you got a production manager. Sit them down, walk them through the quote and say, this is what I'm expecting. Is there any concerns, any red flags, anything that you were not aware of? Because things get missed, right? So it's a good best practice to just express what your expectations are with the on-site team once you get on site. And lastly, don't be afraid to ask for a discount. If you get a quote back and there's no discount and it's not at the price you want it to be, don't be afraid to ask. Ask for a discount. Ask for anything. You're the customer. You're spending a lot of money. We want to make you happy. So don't be afraid to ask. And that concludes my talk. At this time, I'm happy to open it up to questions, and we can get into it.
Let's do it. We've had a few roll in, especially the last couple minutes. So thank you to those of you who have submitted. Thank you, Bill, for this great information. And I love how you wrapped it up so nicely there at the end. All right, let's start with our questions here. First one, do any audiovisual companies offer variable rates for different industries, such as healthcare or nonprofit versus for-profit?
Great question. Definitely, there's tax exempt, status for different tax exempt organizations. I see that all the time. But variable rates, I have to be honest, I've never quite seen that. It's not a bad idea. I definitely, I like that idea, actually. There are some organizations doing very impactful work and they're nonprofit and they're not making hardly any money. So maybe it would be a goodwill gesture to offer discounted rates for those types of organizations. So haven't seen it, but maybe it should happen. That's my response there.
Sounds good. I agree. I think that would be nice, right?
Yeah.
Another question here we have, how common are the service charges, like 25% plus? Not necessarily labor charges, but just service fees,
Right.
so to speak.
Yes. So this has become an increasingly new thing. It's not new, but the rates keep going up, and I'm seeing pretty high rates at luxury resorts that are really a head scratcher. It's common. Now, what I will say is the more you spend with the hotel, not just on AV, but with other F&B and hotel beds and all of that, the more you spend, the stronger your position is to negotiate down that service charge. So that's unfortunately, I'm not in the hotel industry, but this has become a common practice. And the more you spend, the better you are off in negotiating that service charge way is all I can say on that.
True story. That sounds good. And I think with hotels, I actually worked in the hospitality industry for about half of my career. And I always found that the more hotel rooms you have, the better negotiation power you have for everything else.
Absolutely.
Rooms are king.
Yeah.
All right. Another couple questions here for you, Bill.
Sure.
If your event goals change, say mid-planning, like adding a hybrid component, how do you adjust the RFP without restarting the whole process?
Yeah, I mean, so you could offer an amendment, maybe it may be the simplest one. So amendment to RFP, just a simple extra document, and maybe extend the timeline for the RFP submission. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't start it all over. A lot of AV production companies are very adept at hybrid and virtual these days after coming out of COVID. So it's not a huge kind of niche service anymore. So, but I know there's a bunch of other examples, related to that question as well. But my response is don't start it all over. Just maybe make an amendment and expand it a little bit and then delay the timeline on the proposal.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Another question here. So, and this is a good one. Sometimes audiovisual proposals look so different, it's hard to compare one to the next. What's your advice for creating a fair evaluation framework?
Great question. This kind of goes back to the bullet point I had early on about, day rates versus show rates on equipment. You see, that's probably the most common one. And I would if you want to see show rates on equipment, I would just tell your AV providers, I want show rates, whether you got to give me 3 days and roll it into one price or whatever, but I need this for budgetary purposes. So I would just force your hand and force the issue. And if you want to see it all a certain way, a uniform way to have apples, just mandate it in the RFP, put it in black and white. And, you got to be careful with the spreadsheet thing though, because I've seen a lot of spreadsheets come through with RFPs, and it feels like you're just buying on price at that point and nothing else. And there's not a lot of room for the vendor to kind of tell the story and provide the value proposition. Are you really going to pick this vendor over this vendor because they're microphone is $45 and the other vendor's microphone is $40, right? It can be you're splitting hairs and causing a lot of work. So you got to be careful with the spreadsheet approach, but if you want to lay it out a certain way, just mandate it in the RFP.
Fair enough. That sounds good. I forget sometimes, like as the customer, right? You can like make these requests.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good point. All right. I think we have maybe another question here, and then we do have time if anyone else wants to submit a question. I'm happy to pull those in. I'll ask the last one here that I have. Is it okay if you're not really sure what your full budget is to sort of lowball what you think it might be when you submit your RFP?
Absolutely. You can actually send a huge range in the RFP. It can be a 6-figure range for all I care, right? Like what's the lowest you're trying to spend and what's kind of the ceiling that you can't go over, right? And even if that's a 6-figure variance, that's okay. Just so we know kind of where your head's at is really all we're after, I would say. So that's fine. That's fine if you don't know for sure.
Okay. That sounds good.
Yeah.
I like to work within ranges. Well, I believe that is all of our questions for right now. If anyone happens to submit one in the next minute or two, I'll let you know. And if you happen to submit one after we're done, we'll follow up with you.
That sounds great.
Bill, any sort of parting thoughts, anything to sort of leave us on?
I mean, I'm on show site right now. I'm sure a lot of the attendees here are either going or coming from one. It's that time of year. So I just wish everyone a happy event season and have a great time, end of year, relaxing holiday season upon us. So thank you for having me.
Likewise. Sounds good, Bill. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thank you, like Bill said, for everyone who's joined us today. We really appreciate your time. Hope that you're walking away with some great practical tools and strategies to help you rethink your audiovisual RFP process. And again, we just thank you, Bill, and appreciate everyone being here.